Hi, everyone. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about this concept of parental alienation. When this first happened to me, I've told everyone who's listening to my YouTube channel that I'm a protective parent, that I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. It was coercive control. It was beyond the violent incident model. It was this idea of really harming someone psychologically and legally and financially, and use of the children as weapons. Absolutely. So when this happened to me, I immediately went to the concept of parental alienation because the same thing had happened to my ex, or so I assumed. So my ex partner's mother actually alienated the children, the word alienation, alienated the children from their father. So I'm not excusing any of their father's behaviors. I'm not going to get into details, but I think that my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, this is what's happening to me. And so I read up on all of the research regarding parental alienation, actually began my doctoral work doing some research on some major players in the field. And I want to be really clear. The word alienation works nicely. And sadly, it works nicely for us. It reaffirms that there has been this taking away of what actually is ours. And so I want to reaffirm that for everyone. No one is saying that that hasn't occurred. The problem is the term. It's weaponized all too often against protective mothers. So what's happened in the field is that fathers' rights initiatives have really come into play to use the term in a way to further harm protective parents. And so if I'm a coercive controller, I am trying to retain power and control over you. If I'm trying to do this, then what's the best way? Well, we know this. I always say that revenge at all costs, right? So I am going to do what Dr. Evan Stark, he calls children secondary victims, not because their victimization is not actually like harmful, but because that's actually not what the coercive controller is interested in. The coercive controller is interested in harming the adult victim and uses the children, weaponizes the children to do that. And so they become soldiers in a war, and the war is against you. And so when they are indoctrinated, brainwashed, when all of this gaslighting of a false narrative is happening to them, they, of course, are alienated from you, right? So I want to reaffirm that for you. But really, what's going on is a fracturing of their attachment to you. That's really what's going on. And, there's a lot of words out there now that are used, but I'm going to come back from a clinical perspective and say that someone is trying really hard from day one. I always say this has started from day one. I want to be clear. These people show up as wonderful parents. These people show up as loving partners. In many ways, they show up successful in their careers, or maybe not so successful in their careers. There's a variety of ways they show up. They're charlatans. They're not real human beings who have true feelings and emotions. They are covering their feelings and emotions with shame. And so they weaponize our children against us. Our children are just objects to them. Our children do not really matter to them. And so you see, it's kind of like, soldiers in a war. I'm just going to use this person to win. That's what I'm going to do. And so when we use the term parental alienation, I think there's a couple things going on. First of all, we're reaffirming where it came from, which it came from a very, unfortunately, unhealthy man who actually minimized child sexual abuse and used it against protective mothers who were trying to protect their children from sexual abuse. That's number one. Number two, there's a whole world of people who are using it to affirm father's rights. And so a good father certainly deserves time with his children. But if someone has been abusive, even covertly, as in coercive control, then that person really, children don't need two parents. They certainly do not. I think thirdly is that what happens is children go to therapy, whether they're forced into repair therapy or horrifyingly reunification camps, where they literally have their attachment to whoever that other parent is totally taken away from them. That there is a narrative in that, that we validate the circumstances of the most powerful parent, sadly. That's what ends up happening all too often. That's all coercive control. That's about people wielding their power over others to harm others. It's not healthy for children. So, I was asked to testify in a case, and the case was settled, thankfully. But the idea behind a reunification camp, I didn't know 100% if the other parent was the abuser, the parent who actually calls and his attorney asked me to be hired. All I knew is that reunification camps are harmful. That's all I know. All I know is that when we force a child to repair with someone they think is an abuser, when we force that repair therapy, that's harmful because it's a coercion and control of a child. So, how do we help children in these circumstances? Well, first of all, we really want to look at attachment. And so, what's happened with the foundation? What was the foundation of the parenting relationship? And is there one person who exerted power and control over another? And in that, they're using the children. This is what therapists need to be looking at. This is what court professionals need to be looking at, is what was the foundation of that relationship? Who was the protective parent all along? Who was the person who was mostly engaged in child care and child development and all of those things? Oftentimes it's not shared before there's a separation or divorce. Oftentimes there was one person who was that person. And then is the other person exerting control in some way? We can look at the other ways. It can be financial. It can be using, the court system, of course, which is also financial. But really understanding that it's a fracturing of the attachment that child has with that protective parent. And so when we have clinicians who are validating a child's circumstances, when they say they hate their mother because, she's weird or she's crazy or she yells all the time, I ask therapists to ask the question, is that child receiving a false narrative? And how do we find that out? We talk with them about healthy versus unhealthy relationship dynamics. We talk with them about, let's talk about, when you went to soccer, who was the person on the sidelines? Who was the person who went to your school every week, maybe or every other week, and engaged in reading time? Or who's the person who takes you to doctor's appointments or follows doctors? And who is the person who, always was there at bedtime or was doing activities with you during the day? There typically is a discernment there. And maybe one parent worked a lot. And that doesn't mean they weren't the protective parent, but we really have to look at who the psychological attachment is to that child, for that child. Who is that? And is that person they're attached to, is that person healthy? Or has that person been attempting to fracture their attachment with their primary caretaker? I call it malicious fracturing of attachment. I say it starts with day one. These people show up a certain way, but they're consistently, persistently ensuring they have power over another parent. That's what that is. So there is a lot of a really amazing long-term research out there done by these people who have researched parental alienation. And I get that it is affirming. I get that it feels like someone is hearing you. I'm asking you to just think about the fact that that research is based on someone who said that mothers who claim sexual abuse of their children were hysterical and jealous, and rather than understanding where it comes from. And so, and knowing that now there are rights of fathers that are using it against protected parents and winning at a very high rate, winning at a very high rate. So let's really look at the foundational dynamics of that parenting relationship, of that partnership between the parents, and really unpack that to truly understand what's happening to children. From a clinical perspective, it's all about fracturing their attachment. And the sad part is, and I talk about this when I talk about betrayal trauma, is that they are betrayed by that coercively controlling parent. They are betrayed by that parent because they know they can't be authentic. They know they can't be themselves. They know they're not loved unconditionally. They know it. But then they're being told that that protective parent doesn't love them unconditionally, that that protective parent doesn't accept them authentically. And they get into a narrative that you don't love me, you don't care about me, or you think I'm dumb, or or you like my sibling more than me, when actually that's all along the course of control that was doing. Triangulation. And yes, I tear up about it because it is so harmful to the developing brain. And nobody is recognizing this covert abuse. And I would say that covert abuse, the foundation of it, is fracturing the attachment that a child needs to their most protective, loving, healthy parent. Children are resilient. They can overcome it. It does take time. And the best way to help them is to continually show up in a way that they see us in a position of personal power and that we don't explain ourselves. And I'll talk about that in another video. So I hope that that's helpful. Um, I hope that that's reaffirming. You aren't alone. I was there and I saw it as, and it is an alienation, but that term only emboldens abusers, sadly. So only emboldens coercive controllers. Have a great day, everyone.